Hi everybody, my name is Sensei Caity and I am here at CodeNinjas where we do all sorts of STEM activities and we teach kids to code by building their very own video games. So today I'm actually going to teach you how to build your very own video game. It's going to be super awesome. But the very first thing we need to do is we need to click on Google and we need to type in scratch.mit.edu. And feel free to pause while you do this part. I've been on Scratch quite a few times, so I have it loaded on my computer already. And just click enter, and it should take you straight to Scratch. Now, Scratch is super cool. It's called block-based coding, and it's actually its very own coding language, which we really love at CodeNinjas. So it's going to teach you all the basics so you can expand your knowledge when it comes to coding and making video games. So the very first thing I'm going to do is, if you used Scratch before, you might already have an account. So I've used Scratch before, so I'm going to click sign in. If you want to save your games, I recommend joining Scratch. You can, if you want to, you can save your games after the fact. So if you wanted to ask your parents' permission, which you should before you make an account, you could do it after you build your game. So we can save it once you build the account, but we can also do that at the end too as well. So I'm going to click sign in. But if you don't have an account, that's okay. All we're going to do is we're going to go up to the top left of our screen and I'm going to click on create. And it's a little bit hard to find. It's right beside the Scratch logo. So I'm going to click create. And this is going to bring us to our very own video game making platform. So I'm just going to wait for it to load and then we'll get started. The game we're going to make today is an old-fashioned game. It's old school, as some would say, and it's one of the very first video games that was ever made. And it is called Pong. So Pong's really cool. It's where you have a paddle at the bottom of your screen that you move, and you have a ball that bounces off your paddle. And if you miss your paddle, it's game over. So the very first thing I'm going to do, though, is once you have your Scratch loaded up, I'm going to teach you a little bit about Scratch and the language that we're going to learn when we're coding with it. So to get all of our code, you'll see on the left-hand side of your screen, there's all these different colored circles. We are going to click on these circles to find our code. Some of the colors are kind of similar, like the yellow and orange or the two blues on here. It's a little bit silly that they did that, but to make sure that we all click on the same pieces, I'll say things like blue motion, purple looks, or light blue sensing. That way we can hopefully all be on the same page when it comes to finding our code. So play around with that a little bit. Look at all the options. You'll notice there's a ton of code in here. Don't worry, we won't be using every single piece of code, but we will be pulling from a lot of these colors. So let's make sure that we are able to click on them and we can see all the things I have to offer. The very next thing we're going to use today is we are going to use sprites. So in video games, sprites are what we call our characters. So your very own personal avatar. If you did decide to make one of those, we would call that a sprite. But in Pong, we're just going to have a ball and a paddle for now. So if you go to the bottom right of your screen, you'll notice there's a little cat that has a plus sign on it. And we can click on that to find our sprites. Right beside it, there is it looks like a little picture frame with of mountains with a plus sign on it. That's how we're going to choose the backdrop for our game. Backdrops are super important for video games. It makes it interesting and fun, and you can personalize it to make your very own. So today, we do not need a cat in our Pong game. That is not going to be a character unless you want to add it in later, but we're not going to start off with a cat. So the Scratch cat always shows up on our Scratch. But what we're going to do is we're going to see this little trash can on our Scratch cat, and we're going to click that to delete the cat. Now we don't have any sprites. So what we need to do is we need to click on the cat plus, and the very first piece we're going to find is a ball. Now I'm just going to choose a classic ball, but you can make this game your own because it's your very own video game. So it doesn't have to be a boring old ball. If you want it to be a balloon, a baseball, a basketball, maybe you want to do a beach ball, or a little bug or something, just make sure it's small and it's kind of circle shaped. That way that ensures our game's gonna work as best as possible. So I'm gonna click on my ball. Now, you'll notice my game's kind of boring and I wanna spice it up a little bit. So I'm gonna add a backdrop. So remember, to add the backdrop, we're gonna go right beside where we chose a sprite. And it's a little picture with the plus sign in the corner, and I'm just gonna click right on that picture. Now, there's lots of backgrounds to pick from. So if you look at the top, you'll see there's categories. So if I want to do a pattern, I could click on that. Or if I want to do underwater space. So pick a background that doesn't have too much going on. It's not too busy, so you can still see your ball, but definitely pick one that is going to fit the theme of your game, your personality, right? So I'm going to make mine in the blue sky. So once we have feel free to pause the video right now if you have trouble finding the ball in the background. There's a lot of options, but if you're ready to go, we're gonna start coding already. So I'm always gonna make sure I'm coding the right sprite. When you have one or more sprite, which is our characters, it's gonna be important. They're all gonna have different code in them. So to make sure I'm coding my ball, let's say instead of my background, I can click on my ball right here, but we can also look in the top right corner of our little piece of paper. That's what I like to call it. This is where we're going to drag all of our code. In the top right hand corner, there's a picture of our ball. So that way we really make sure we're coding the right sprite. So the very first thing that we're going to code is we are going to drag our mouse and we're going to click on the yellow events circle. So this is how we're going to start most of our game, is with yellow events. And the very first piece of code we're going to drag in is called when the green flag is clicked. So I'm going to click on this. I think you guys are on tablet, so I'm going to click with my finger and drag it into the piece of paper. So you'll notice this piece of paper goes on forever, and sometimes it's really easy to lose code in here. So we want to try and keep it as organized as possible. But feel free to zoom out and in if you have lots of code and you need to zoom out and make more room. But you can put it anywhere you want on here. It does not matter. So coding in Scratch is really cool because everything hooks on like little puzzle pieces. So we have to make sure that our puzzle pieces are hooked on and they're not just floating beside each other. So when they hook on, you'll notice they just click together really fast. So that's really important when it comes to Scratch. You guys will get the hang of it right away. It's easy peasy. So the very first thing we're going to do is code our ball to bounce, right? So to make our ball bounce, we kind of want it to spin around all crazy and go off the corners and things like that. So we're going to find the code that we need in blue motion, the very first circle on the left-hand side. We're going to drag in turn 15 degrees. It doesn't matter which way, as long as that ball's spinning. So I'm going to click on my turn 15 degrees, and I'm going to hook it on to that puzzle piece onto when the green flag's clicked. So really make sure it's hooked on like that. Otherwise, the computer won't know it's attached, right? So we want our ball to bounce forever. We never want our ball to stop. We don't want it to stop when the sun sets. We don't want it to stop when the snow melts. We want it to stop forever. So to find the forever code, we need to go to orange control. So we're clicking on a new circle on the side called orange control. And we're going to drag in these weird empty pieces. And they look like C's almost. And they're kind of complicated, but I promise they're not actually complicated. They just look like it. These are called loops. And loops are really important because it allows our game to repeat and repeat and repeat without having to do the code every single time. So instead of writing bounce around forever, because that would take a lot of time, we're just going to drag in the orange loop that says forever on it. And we're going to put it right underneath our turn 15 degrees. That way, we can put all the code we want inside of it, and that's the code that's going to happen forever. So once you have your forever loop hooked onto the bottom of your turn 15 degrees, we're going to go back to our blue motion, and there's not really a code that tells our ball just to bounce. So we kind of have to make it ourselves. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to drag in move 10 steps, the very first one in blue motion, and we're actually going to fit it inside our forever loop because we want our ball to bounce forever. Now, there's one more little piece that we have to add. We want to add in if on the edge of the screen, bounce off, because we don't want our ball just to float into the universe in the middle of nowhere. We want it to keep bouncing around in our screen. So if you scroll down a little bit, in blue, we're still in blue motion. Scroll down a little bit. There's a little piece of code almost right at the end, and it says, if on edge, bounce. So they actually made that code for us. We're super lucky. So I'm going to click on if on edge bounce, and I'm going to drag it right underneath move 10 steps. And it doesn't look like it's going to fit, but Scratch reads our minds, and it stretches out that forever, makes it really big sandwich so we can fit our if on edge bounce inside. So sometimes it might not look like it'll fit, but I promise Scratch will read our mind and it'll do it for us. So now we coded our ball to bounce, but we should test that first. It's really important when you're building video games to make sure that you test every once in a while. So if you make a mistake, you can find it really easily. Otherwise, you have to go back through all this code and look at all your mistakes. So to test our code, we're going to go over to our game display. So this is showing us the game we've made so far. And on the right-hand side, and we're going to go right up. And there's a start and a stop. We're going to click on start. And when we click on the green flag, our ball should bounce around the screen. So that's the very first part. We coded our ball to move around. Now, if you have a little bit of extra time at home, or if you want to trick your friends and family, you can make your ball bounce faster. To do that, all you have to do is move 10 steps. You can change that number to a bigger number. So remember that if you, at the end of the game, if you want to mod it, which is making the game your own, so taking what I give you and turning it into your own game, you can make that to a bigger number. Some would say you could even make it to an impossible number. So definitely play with that if you have time. So the very next thing we have to code is our paddle. There's no paddle in our game yet. So the very first thing we have to do before we code, I guess, is we have to go down to our sprite, choose a sprite, and find the paddle. Now, you can use whatever you want for a paddle, but it just has to be horizontal. So it has to go along the bottom of your screen, and it has to be long and skinny. Sometimes if they have too many things sticking out, it'll kind of mess up our game a little bit. So really good examples would be the broom or bread. But I don't think the arrow would work very well because it has that sticky up, right? So you could use a cloud if you wanted. Sometimes it doesn't work really well because, again, it's kind of wavy, right? We kind of want something long and skinny. So I think I'm going to choose just a normal old paddle. So I'm going to search paddle. And once I have my paddle, I'm going to drag it to the bottom of my screen. Now, my paddle kind of blends into my green a little bit, and I don't really want that because I kind of want to be able to see my paddle. So to change that, I'm going to go up to where we pull our code from. Looks like little tabs on a computer, and I'm going to click on costumes. And this is where we can paint our characters. So this is definitely something. I don't think we'll have a lot of time to play around with it today, but if you're bored at home, this is something you can definitely play around with. Scratch is free, so if you have a computer or a tablet at home, all you have to do is Google Scratch and you can play with it at home. So I just turned my paddle purple really quickly, just so I can see it in my trees. So we want our paddle to follow us when we click on it. We want to say our finger is going to be the mouse, and we want to set the paddle to move with the mouse. But we don't want our paddle to move up and down. We only want it to move left and right. So we are going to make sure we're coding our paddle. This is super important. So click on your paddle. You can click on it on your screen. You can click down below and really double check in that top right corner of our piece of paper that our paddle's there. Now, we want our game to start no matter what when we click that green flag. When the green flag's clicked is going to be the start of our whole game. So I'm going to go over to yellow events. And I'm going to drag in when the green flags clicked. So yellow events, when the green flags clicked. Now, we want our paddle to move forever. We never want our paddle to stop moving. Otherwise, that wouldn't be a very good game if it just randomly didn't listen to us. So we want it to listen to us forever. So to do that, we need to go back into our orange control. We need to drag in the loop that says forever, just like we did before, and hook it on. Now, we're going to do something weird. We're going to set our x-axis. So our x-axis is left and right, and our y-axis is up and down. So we want our paddle to move left and right. So we're going to set our x-axis to be our mouse, which in this case is our finger. So to do that, I'm going to go to Blue Motion, and I'm going to go scroll down, and I'm going to find the piece of code that says set x to, and we're going to put that inside our forever. Now, it's really important that you don't accidentally put in change x by, because it's right above it and they look really similar. So make sure you read this code that you're putting in, and it says set x to. And we're not going to worry about the number. We don't need numbers right now, so just ignore the number. So now we want to set x to be our mouse. We want our mouse to only go left and right. So to do that, we're going to go into a new piece of code, a new category. We're going to go into light blue sensing. So I'm going to find light blue sensing. Now, we're just going to find a little oval, and all it says inside of it is mouse X. So we're going to take mouse X, and I'm going to drag it over here, but it doesn't really look like there's anywhere I can put it in, right? Like I said earlier, we don't need numbers. So I'm going to take mouse X, and I'm just going to put it right over top of that number. And that's it. So now we can click our green flag, and you should be able to move your paddle. So I think all you have to do is just drag your paddle, and that should work. Now, I think on the touch screen, you still be able to move it up and down. So we'll see at the very, very end. We'll have to wait and see to play test it when we're on the play screen, not the testing screen. So the testing screen, you might still be able to move it around, but when we actually played at the very end, it should work for you perfectly. So now, the very last piece of code we're going to do is, you'll notice if you're testing your game and you try to bounce the ball off your paddle, it just goes right through it. It doesn't bounce off. So we actually have to code the ball to bounce off the paddle. So to do this, we're going to click on our ball code. It's very important we click on our ball code. So look in the top corner of your piece of paper and make sure there's a little picture of a ball there. Now, we're actually going to start a new line of code. So we're not going to add on to the code that we already have. We're going to start a new chunk of code. And like our other pieces of code, we started it with when the green flags clicked. So let's go to our yellow events, and let's drag in a new spot when the green flags clicked. So I like to put it right beside because it makes me feel organized and I can see all of my code at once. You can put it below if you want, you can put it above, it does not matter. It can go anywhere on your piece of paper. Now, this is the hardest piece of code, but I'm confident you guys can do it. So what we need to say is, this is our human sentence, and we have to translate into a computer sentence. We want to say, if we're touching the paddle, then bounce off. Now, Scratch doesn't have a lot of that code already made, so we're going to have to try and make some of this code. So the very first thing that's really important is we always want our ball to bounce off the paddle. We never want it to just randomly stop. We always want our computer to listen to us, right? So we're going to go to orange control, and we're going to drag in that forever loop, just like the other times, and hook it on to our new line of code. So we're going to put a forever in here. And that's really important because that makes sure that our ball bounces forever and it never ever stops. Now, we need to make our sentence. If we're touching the paddle, then bounce off. So we're gonna do something really, really tricky and cool. We're gonna stay in our orange control and we're gonna add a loop inside of a loop. So I like to say we're putting a sandwich inside a sandwich. We're making a Big Mac of code. So we're gonna leave our forever code just like it is, but we're gonna go right below it and we're gonna find the piece of code that says if, then. And that's how we're gonna make our sentence. So I'm gonna drag my if then, and I'm gonna make that forever loop stretch all the way over top of my if then and make sure it's inside. So once you get your if then inside your forever, we are on track to get going. So now we want to say, let's hear a sentence again. If we touch the paddle, then bounce. So to add the code that says if we touch the paddle, we need to go into our light blue sensing. So what we can do is you can see the very first piece of code in our light blue sensing says touching mouse pointer. But we can change this. So if you click on that little arrow beside mouse pointer, we can change it to be our paddle. So there's mouse pointer, edge, and paddle. I'm going to click on paddle. So yours might be broom or loaf of bread, whatever you chose, but in your brain, whatever your paddle is, make sure you change this first piece of code just by clicking this little arrow, and it'll have a drop-down menu. Now, this piece of code doesn't really look like other ones we've used before, but it fits perfectly where we need it. So we're going to click on touching paddle and drag it. And I'm going to drag it right in between this if then. And it's really important. You'll see it lights up when it fits inside of it. And it'll stretch it out and fit it inside. If it doesn't stretch it out, that means it's not in it. So you'll see if I just go like that over top of it, it doesn't fit. It doesn't stretch out for it. So we really want to make sure it's easier if you put the corner in first and then let go, and it'll put it all inside of that. So once you have your if you're touching the paddle, then we want our ball to bounce, right? But like I said earlier, Scratch doesn't really have a piece of code for bouncing. So we're going to have to make it. So we're going to go to our blue motion. And we're going to drag in turn 15 degrees. And we're going to make sure we put turn 15 degrees inside both loops. So not like this. We want to put it inside both loops. So it really fills up that middle of our sandwich. This is the meat and potatoes of our sandwich. Now, we don't want our ball to turn 15 degrees every time because that's predictable. And a really cool thing about video games is they're unpredictable, and that's what makes them challenging. So to make our game unpredictable, we are going to go to green operators. Another new one. We haven't used this one yet. Green operators. It's one of the circles on the side. And we're just going to drag in the oval that says pick random 1 to 10 and put it inside our 15 degrees. So pick random 1 to 10 and replace that 15 degrees with it. Now, we want our ball to turn, we still want it to turn a certain amount of degrees. So I'm going to change my number 1 to be 170, and I'm going to change my 10, the second number, to be 190. So this is telling our ball, once it bounces off the paddle, it's going to pick a certain amount of degrees to rotate, might be 170, might be 190, and then it'll bounce off the wall. And that'll kind of make it spin crazy and random. And that helps us, again, make our game less predictable. So we don't know where it's going to go because it's spinning random. Now, the other piece of code is now we just have to make it move. So if we go to our blue motion and drag in, move 10 steps, the very first piece of code, we want to hook it on to our other blue. It's really important that we don't hook it on in our forever loop, but not our if then. We really want to make sure it's hooked on to our turn random degrees. So really make sure we fit it inside that sandwich. We always want to make sure we put it inside our Big Mac. Now, All we're gonna add is one last piece of code, and we're gonna go to orange control to find it. Orange control. And it's the very first one in orange control. And it says, wait 1 second. And we're gonna hook that on right underneath our move 10 steps. So this is really important as well because it gives our eye a second to see the ball bounce off. If we didn't have that in there, it would bounce so fast you wouldn't even be able to see it. But if we have it wait 1 second before it bounces, then our eyes can really see it bounce off the paddle. Now we can click the green flag and you can play your game and move your paddle, and your ball should bounce right off your paddle. So that's it. That's our pong game. Next time, we will go over how to add a score to our games and maybe add some degrees of difficulty. Don't forget, you can always change the speed of your ball by changing your move 10 steps to a bigger number. And this will make your ball bounce around faster. So if you challenge your friends and family or any grown-ups to play, you can trick them and you can make it really fast. So we call this modding. So that's where you make the game your very own game. So you can change the background, but make sure you don't change your sprites, because if I change my ball, I'm going to lose all this code, and we don't want to lose all that code. So really make sure your ball and your paddle stay the same because we have code on them. But if you want to change your background, you can. And finally, to save your game, all you have to do is click on File and Save Now. Really important. File and Save Now. So file's on the top left of your screen. File and Save Now. And if you want to make an account, this is the time where you would ask your grown-up for help to make your very own Scratch account. So thank you so much for joining me to make a video game today. And I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope you play it with all your friends and family. And I hope to see you in CodeNinjas one day. But until then, I will keep making videos and we will keep making games together. Thanks so much.